I am a huge fan of the Onimusha series, and with the franchise making its return in 2026 with Way of the Sword, I decided that it was time to revisit my favorite game in the franchise, Onimusha 3 Demon Siege. I have fond memories of this game. It is the only title in the series in which I have completed multiple playthroughs to get all the hidden extras. It goes without saying that I absolutely adore this game. Now, it has been a long time since I've actually played Onimusha 3, and I assume that it's going to receive a remaster relatively soon because Onimusha 2 did. So here's hoping that when the remaster drops, they keep everything intact. With all that out of the way, let's revisit Onimusha 3 Demon Siege. The game opens with series protagonist and all-around Chad Samnosuke Akechi confronting series antagonist Nobunaga at Honnouji Temple. This is a very brief section to reacclimate players to the series' gameplay mechanics. If you've never played an Onimusha game, it's relatively straightforward. You attack, dodge, guard, spam specials, and repeat that until the enemy is dead. Most enemies will go down in a few seconds. There is no stamina bar to manage, you just need to be aggressive in your openings, and you'll be fine. I had to restart the game because I found out that the default settings have you on like low gore and the blood is green, which, sure. When you finally confront Nobunaga, you're actually challenged by his ward Ranmaru, who reminds me a lot of Seita from Rurouni Kenshin, but not as threatening. This fight requires you to be aggressive, use your special attacks, and eventually once he's defeated, you'll arrive at a cutscene that will end up teleporting Samnosuke to 2004 Paris because the Genma are invading, and the cutscene of their invasion is actually pretty brutal. Once the cutscene ends, you're formally introduced to Jacques, played by legendary French actor Jean Reno, best known for Leon the Professional. And this is a really cool scene because you get to see whether or not modern weapons work against the Genma. And spoiler alert, they do. But most of the soldiers who are engaging with the Genma are absolutely trash with their aim because how are you missing a slow-moving enemy with 4 legs point blank? It's just sad. After the short introduction to Jacques and watching him get teleported away, you then resume controlling Samnosuke and you have to make your way to the Arc de Triomphe, which, moving forward, I'm just going to call the Arc because I will butcher the French language and I apologize. As you make your way to the Arc, you'll run into Michel, who you'll find out is Jacques' fiance and is someone I think deserves their own game because of how capable they are. At the Arc, you'll acquire your first new weapon, Tenso, and after doing so, you're going to have to fight through scores of enemies until you eventually reach the top, which is where you'll encounter series villain, all-around gross-looking guy, Gilden Stern, who will then wax poetic on their plans, which is how he operates in almost every single Onimusha. You're then left to fight this mech, and upon destroying it, the perspective shifts to Jacques, who we learn got teleported to 16th century Japan. Now, playing as Jacques is a lot of fun. He uses a weapon set of a sword, and every weapon he acquires is a variation of that. The best thing about Jacques is that he's able to traverse long distances using his whip as long as he locks onto an Oni bug. I'm kidding. The best thing about Jacques is that upon downing his enemy, he unloads his entire pistol clip into them until they are gone. Once again proving that ancient problems require modern solutions. This opening section with Jacques is straightforward. You're going to acquire the whip, the Oni Gauntlet, meet Akko, a multifaceted Tengu who is a universal translator, magnet for items, and will transcend timelines so that Jacques and Samnosuke can be on the same page when it comes to completing objectives. She also wears these neat little vests that have different effects. These are found hidden in chests throughout the map. Akko is never annoying and is very useful, which is a plus. But back to Jacques, you'll eventually fight your way to a torn down temple, which is where you'll meet the past version of Samnosuke, who I'm just going to call Sammy from now on, which I actually suspect is a alternate version of him, but more on that later. You'll fight side by side, solve a puzzle involving a large mirror, acquiring Jacques' first weapon, which is a really cool looking whip sword that reminded me of the bone sword in the movie Brotherhood of the Wolf. And from here, you're going to make your way to a large building where you'll learn that Gilden Stern has been storing modern day items. It's also your first boss fight with Jacques, but it's really a mini boss and not a tough one at that. Use the Oni bug in the center to hop around for easy damage. Upon defeating the boss, Jacques will begin to worry for his son Henri, and this is where you learn that Akko will jump between timelines, delivering a message from father to son. You're now Sammy again. You're going to learn through your journey in Onimusha 3 that the game gives ample time for both the main characters to shine, which is a huge plus because they're both really fun to play. It's now time to make your way through the sewers with Michel, fighting slug-like monsters who will explode, creating smaller slugs, solving simple Resident Evil crank puzzles, and also using Michel as a distraction so you can acquire some goodies. She can't die, so don't feel bad. When you reach the end of the sewers, you're going to have to clear debris. And for some reason, there's like this large boulder that's conveniently placed for whatever reason that you will be able to knock down and push to the end. Upon arriving at the end of the sewers, you'll find yourself outside of Notre Dame, and this is actually a pretty quick end to Sammy's chapter. It then shifts to Jacques, and you will find yourself in Senshu Sakai, a port town in which past Sammy believes the modern goods that were found in the mountains originated. Here, you'll do some quick exploring, find treasure at the beach, cut off some fake tiger heads, give a watermelon to a kid because he'll then give you access to an Oni bug, and then eventually discover that Gilden Stern and his cronies were here, and that the modern items did originate from this area. Once you do discover this, though, the town is then overrun by Genma. You're going to have to cut your way through the hordes to make to the docks. Along the way, Jacques will gain a new weapon, which I think has the best special ability in the game. And this will unlock a door that will contain a bunch of modern items and more plans left behind by Gilden Stern. How that dork survived this long will never cease to amaze me with this type of carelessness. Jacques and Sammy then realize that the ship that's currently ported at the docks is a Genma ship, and after finding your way there, you're going to come face to face with Heihachi, a legendary spear fighter and servant of Nobunaga. This fight is really easy because it's a 2-on-1, but the fight actually acts as a distraction because during this duel, the ship takes off. Luckily for you and the plot, Jacques' motorcycle just happens to be on the pier, so Akko shifts timelines to acquire his key from Henri, which then allows Jacques to pull off a Mission Impossible-like stunt that Tom Cruise might appreciate as he drives his motorcycle off the pier and then uses his whip to land safely on the ship. You'll need to fight the enemies below deck and deal with one of the treasure Oni who are just a pain in the ass in this game. But once you do, you'll be able to access the control room, and then you're treated to a quick cutscene, and it's back to modern day Sammy, who is still waiting for you outside of Notre Dame. Like previous Onimusha games, you're going to need to upgrade your weapons, not just for damage output, but to also access new areas. This is something I conveniently forgot, so I spent time in the sewers killing enemies until I had enough souls, and this took a long time. But after I gained access, I made my way to the altar, pushed in a red impression, unlocked a secret chamber, and made my way underground to begin one long environmental puzzle. I acquired the ability to absorb darkness through the dark charm. You're going to use this on the statues in the cathedral area so that you can acquire Sammy's second weapon, Kuga, and a Dachi that has one of the stronger specials in the game. You're going to need this weapon to unlock a door underground. You're greeted with blades and weird cattails that will do damage to you for some reason. You're going to need to acquire their rope ladder and then use that ladder to acquire the final golden skull, which is going to help you unlock the final room. Did I mention you're going to have to do this while fighting hordes of enemies? Because you do. Now, once you're able to unlock the final door, you're going to come face to face with Gilden Stern again and be introduced to the Time Folder Machine. Me personally, I don't like that name, but who cares, because Gilden Stern leaves, and then you have to fight 2 elite enemies, and with Kuga's special, they get dispatched pretty quickly. You will then use the Time Folder, and Sammy finds himself in an underground temple with the Genma ship in the background. Welcome to the time-hopping, puzzle-solving sections of Onimusha 3. Now, in these sections, Sammy and Jacques are going to have to work together, meaning you're going to swap items and open up doors for each other, and that's how you're generally going to solve puzzles. And these sections are great. So, for the Underwater Temple, the gist of it is that there are 3 discs you need to acquire to open up various rooms, so you're going to constantly swap between characters until you've unlocked that final red room. During this time, you're going to solve puzzles using PEMDAS. You're going to find the gatekeepers to grant you access to the Phantom Realm, which I recommend you do complete if you want the best weapons. You're going to fight multiple bosses of varying difficulty. Sammy's going to fight Ranmaru, but he is now a Genma, and he's honestly kind of a pushover. And Jacques will end up fighting the 2-headed dog. This fight sucks because it takes a lot to take it down. And I think that throughout the entirety of Onimusha 3, most boss fights are fairly easy, but this one requires you to be on your toes at all times and heal constantly, otherwise you are going to get killed. And thankfully, I had a bunch of healing items because I play really dumb in this game, and it's kind of embarrassing. Once you've defeated the good pup, Jacques escapes onto a Genma train, and Sammy is captured. Henri, against all reason and against the best wishes of Michel, decides that he is going to be the one that's going to save Sammy, and he's like 10 in this game, so he isn't going to save anybody. It's Michel time. She has a machine gun and a shotgun, and you're just going to have to make your way to the Time Folder to start things off. During this period, it is recommended to kill as many enemies as possible because she will transfer all of her acquired souls to Sammy. And this is amazing for leveling up. Enemies in this game are practically endless, and she has infinite ammo, which means you have infinite time, so have fun. Once you've made your way to the time folder, you're going to learn that Gilden Stern has taken both Sammy and Henri captive at the zoo. So here's where you're going to be introduced to Genma tigers, and you're going to be fighting stronger versions of basic enemies. And you might panic just a bit, but there's no need to worry though, because Michel is packing grenades. Eventually, you'll find an area with 4 cages hanging above an enclosure. The second and fourth cages have items that you'll need to include the boat key and sniper rifle. The sniper rifle in this game is insanely powerful and can kill strong Genma at a distance with just a few shots, and it's just fantastic. Once you use the boat to head deeper into the zoo, you're going to make your way to the aquarium where both Henri and Sammy are being held. There's an emotional reunion, but that's cut short because of Gilden Stern. He's a douchebag, so Sammy has to save them. You have to backtrack into the zoo to acquire a lab key, and then it's time to finally face Gilden Stern. This fight is not fun to play at all, because Gilden Stern only takes damage at key times. Most of the time he is trying to revive 2 suits of armor. They're easily dispatched, but they do high damage. Once Gilden Stern eventually falls, Henri and Michel are saved, and it's time to make your way to Mount Saint Michel. You start off as Sammy, but you quickly swap to Jacques because you can't go anywhere, which is really funny. But you do find out that the Genma are using Frenchmen to run the castle, which is actually kind of sad. You're going to end up dueling Heihachi again, who poses no real threat to you at this point, and then you're introduced to Vega Donna, the queen of the Genma and Nobunaga's wife. And listen, I see the vision. Now, just like the underwater temple, you're going to constantly swap between Sammy and Jacques to solve puzzles and open up different doors. And in this section includes a tile puzzle that for some reason stumped me like it did when I first played this game, and it just brought back all this weird trauma. You're going to head to an alternate version of Paris to acquire a key surrounded by a bunch of elite enemies, who I did not fight, by the way. I just ran past and immediately jumped back to the original timeline because I don't want to waste my time like that. You're going to acquire seeds to grow a plant so that Sammy can descend in the future, and acquire a gear for Jacques to open up what looks to be a cathedral. Jacques will eventually get caught up in a trap, and because Henri can sense the danger in the future, you get to control Michel and cut through hordes of enemies using your newly acquired grenade launcher. Once again, she is practically unstoppable because you have unlimited ammo. And now that she's even stronger, do yourself a favor and just farm for souls. Once Michel and Henri meet up with Sammy, Henri will then solve the trap puzzle and then telepathically communicate with Jacques so they can solve it on his end. I messed up this section pretty bad because through an emulator, I'm using an Xbox controller, so my brain did not work too good. I did happen to clutch it at the end though. Once you save Jacques, you're going to swap back to Sammy and leave the castle, but waiting for you is the 2-headed dog, and this fight is actually tougher because you can no longer use Oni bugs to jump over attacks like Jacques could. This fight is long and feels unnecessarily so. I think I used almost all of my healing items before it eventually died, but sure. You're then treated to a really cool cutscene in which Michel outdrives an explosion and Jacques learns that the castle is actually alive, and I thought this was really cool. Once Jacques regains consciousness after this insane fall, he reunites with past Sammy and Heihachi, and then they have to make their way to Azuchi Castle. This is one of my favorite sequences of the game, as you're going to be navigating the icy waters using Oni bugs. Luckily, Sammy is a monster and will down most enemies in a few hits. You'll eventually arrive at a fort and Jacques and Sammy are separated, Resident Evil style, and Jacques must solve a few room puzzles to eventually acquire a jewel that will allow Sammy to summon and control an army of Oni. This whole sequence is really impressive for a PS2 game, considering you are fighting waves of enemies that do not stop spawning. There's a lot of soul gathering to be done here, so farm to your heart's content. I know I did. Once you're done and made your way to the castle, Heihachi will chase Ranmaru and you must make your way up through the castle to eventually confront Vega Donna. This fight is actually pretty cool, and as long as you guard her poison attacks, it's going to create large openings and the fight becomes so much easier. And once it's over, you're going to discover that Heihachi has unfortunately fallen in battle, and now it's time to switch to a modern day Sammy and make your way up to the Eiffel Tower. I both love and hate this section. I love the way it looks, I just hate the time traps. If you're caught up in any of these time traps, they will transfer you all the way back to a checkpoint, and this can be a pain in the ass because those spiky Genma that can roll into you will push you backwards into them. They're the only enemy I had issues with because everyone else can be hit with a shock arrow and that will stun them in place. I ran past most problematic enemies, and once you get to the top, it's a duel between you and Genma Ranmaru. This fight is easy, but it is time consuming given that he will dodge and block everything. Spam specials, and he eventually goes down. Ranmaru, though, with his last breath, will still activate the massive time folder, and then it shifts back to Jacques. You're now at the beginning of the game, and it's time to confront Nobunaga, but first, past Ranmaru is going to get his ass beat.
This one's for Heihachi. You've been avenged, Heihachi. Let's go. Nobunaga is here.
That felt good. The fight with Nobunaga is simple. Swing until he's down. That's it. It's the last fight with Jacques, and then he gets transported to the future while past Sammy gets unceremoniously killed. It's actually kind of a sad moment. Jacques reunites with Henri, Michel, and modern-day Sammy, who then jumps back into his timeline while Jacques and his loved ones have a tender reunion, which is cut short because Ranmaru kills Henri.
Henri! Henri! Mais...
Take that!
Henri! Henri!
Parle-moi encore!
I love this scene when I first saw it. I was actually shocked that it happened, and I love the fact that Jacques absolutely brutalizes Ranmaru in two different timelines. Shout out to the professional. Now, not all hope is lost as the Oni Gauntlet ends up reviving Henri, and then the three live on happily ever after. Supposedly traumatized for life with what they witnessed, I love that Capcom never really follows up with this. It's great. The perspective then shifts back to Sammy, who finds himself back in his timeline, or is it? The time jumping stuff made me believe that this is an alternate universe because when he's able to interact with himself and then is able to absorb the Oni power to become Super Samnosuke, it just makes me wonder whether or not that this is just an alternate universe. You then brutalize the first version of Nobunaga, but because he's the final boss, he transforms into a Genma Lord. You're then whisked into a different dimension to fight him, and it is an epic clash of power. Once Nobunaga is defeated and then ultimately destroyed, Sammy and Akko head out on a new journey as the Genma threat is still active. Overall, Onimusha 3 aged really well, and I had a blast replaying this game. I love the dual protagonist dynamic, and I think Capcom did an excellent job of having these two interact throughout the game in meaningful ways, and I think they closed out the Samnosuke saga in a satisfying way. I do have two complaints though. One, the fixed camera angles can be problematic at times, especially when you're surrounded and an enemy is off screen, as it can lead to some cheap damage. My other complaint, the game is really short. I beat this in 8 hours, but it can be done far quicker. I think the fastest I've ever done it is like under 5. I just felt like this game should have been longer, but luckily, this game is very replayable. It's such a good end to the original trilogy, and the post-credits cutscene does lead to Onimusha Dawn of Dreams, which I thought was pretty good, but I don't believe many people remember. Now before I end the video, I'm going to play the opening cutscene for Onimusha 3 without commentary, and yeah, if you happen to like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have the opportunity to play Onimusha 3, do so because it's great. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I cannot wait until Way of the Sword arrives in 2026. Onimusha deserves a triumphant return.
Leave him be. I'll take care of him.
Galanganto.
We meet again, Samnosuke.
You shall not meet Nobunaga.